Hi, I'm Wren, a 19-year-old youth advocate and current journalism student. Now, one day I hope to enter the journalism field as a reporter, writer, and storyteller. But what I find interesting is that one of the first reactions people have when I tell them this is, oh yes, we need some good journalists these days, indicating that the field is in dire need of help. Now, this type of response is actually especially common from people around my age, which I find really interesting. And while this might not seem like anything that important, the reason I am bringing this up is because it feeds into a much larger issue. Young people's lack of trust in the media and those working in the industry. With information at our fingertips and fake news rhetoric absolutely everywhere, we are facing an age where trust in the media is really hard to establish, and fact and fiction are looking dangerously similar. Sometimes, having all the information in the world can look the same as having no information at all, because without the right toolbox to sort through the fiction, how are we supposed to believe anything as true? This issue of trust in the media is what I'm going to deep dive into from a young person's perspective. And there are three key issues that I'm going to discuss in relation to social media. So we have the inescapability of news, media's sensationalization, and today's opinion overload. So I'm going to start with my first point. So the inescapability of news. Now, the problem of a lack of trust in the media, I feel, is exacerbated when social media is at the center of news consumption, which it is for young people. So 83% of Australian adults are accessing social media for news daily. And I'm sure that if we were to do a sharp focus on Gen Z and younger people, this number would be even higher, given every single young person I know uses social media on a daily basis. And, while the number of platforms might change depending on the person, everyone reaches for at least one platform a day at a very minimum. And I just want to quickly note that throughout this presentation, my statistics that I'll be sourcing are from the most recent Australian research into adult media literacy. So, barely of any of us are actually reaching for any other news platforms like print or television, because it feels like we are already getting an overload of information from social media alone. As soon as you click onto Twitter, within the span of about 10 minutes, you have come across countless different news stories and opinions on these stories. As soon as you click onto Instagram, you will likely, press on someone's story and then come across a political issue and be exposed to their opinion and others' opinions on that story too. A daily TikTok scroll will likely lead to a news encounter at some point in the day, and even platforms like Snapchat, which is primarily just an app used to send messages to friends, has now created an entire addition to their platform called the Discover page, which is a never-ending newsfeed. News is everywhere on social media. People once used social media as a means to escape the real world, but now people are using the real world as an escape from the digital world. So young people's news consumption isn't always intentional. We aren't actively picking up a newspaper, turning on the television to watch the news, or going to a news website to keep informed. Instead, we are being delivered news when we aren't looking for it. Like when we go to Instagram to look at what our friends are doing, we are also being informed about several justice movements across the world. And while this can be a great thing, more young people informed about the happenings of the world, this leads to a lot more young people having an unintentionally negative perspective of news media, because rather than being something we seek out, it's something that a lot of us absorb when we're seeking entertainment. So when you don't look for information and are instead consistently fed the news when you aren't looking for it, it can feel like a chore. And a lot of young people even get in a habit of just completely skipping past anything that resembles news on their daily scrolls through their socials. I see this with my friends, and I see this with my sister. I think this is largely why Gen Z is more likely to only access one form of media. We experience so much social media unintentionally that a lot of young people just opt to disengage from the news entirely because sometimes it can just feel like too much. Additionally, when the news is online and sort of kept behind a paywall, things like the Herald Sun and places like that, you not only have to pay the money for a subscription, but you actually have to have the want to allocate your money to this. So you have to have the money and the desire to pay for news. And when it feels like social media is already housing too much news, not many young people will actively pay for more news. So thus, we are left with social media being young people's one and only source of news, which they don't even look at as a source of news. It's entertainment that has news filtered through it. So, on to my next point. So, sensationalization is the next issue I want to look at, which feeds directly into this feeling of being overwhelmed. Trying to seek out the truth on social media, as I'm sure we all know, can feel quite exhausting. Not only is there a news overload, which we've explored, but sensationalization makes it so hard to know what's real and what actually matters. Social media is young people's leading source of news, where profit is the key objective for these corporations that are gatekeeping information. And this means that whatever can garner the most likes spreads the most quickly. So here's an example of what Snapchat's Discover page that I mentioned before looks like. So outrageous titles and celebrity news everywhere. It's tabloid journalism. For young people, a first account on Snapchat or Instagram, etc., can be a big step of independence. And these news feeds are sort of our first taste of news that is not sourced via the television or our parents. We are discovering it ourselves. But if this is the news we are seeing from a very young age, given most people download Snapchat at 13 years old now, the tabloid news that our parents tend to steer away from becomes the news that we see most often, painting news in a negative light for young people growing up with social media. And something else I find interesting is that not only are young people being encouraged to assess the validity of news that we are consuming, but we also have to think twice about the images we are seeing. With Photoshop and Facetune being used to edit photos and videos on these platforms by influencers and just everyday users. And then we are also seeing these, sensationalized titles acting as clickbait for news articles. It's just so hard to know whether anything you are seeing on these platforms is real. And it's just really hard to always be accountable to, be the one in control of sorting fact from fiction. It's a really big task. Again, people once used social media as a means to escape the real world, but now people are using the real world as an escape from the digital one because it can just be too overwhelming at times. And this problem is exacerbated when opinions are treated like facts, because this just makes filtering information even more difficult, which leads to my third issue for discussion: opinion overload. So it can feel like the world is going so fast, a million miles an hour, with so much sensationalized issues and so many heavy global topics filling our social media feeds every day. There is so much to absorb and consume. And I think this has in part led to the rise in people sort of taking control of the truth. And why I think conspiracy theories and theorists have gained so much momentum in the past decade. With globalization, the world is moving so rapidly, and some people can feel like they're falling behind. And a way to sort of take control of their reality is to pick up on these theories that make them feel like they have an edge on politics. Because when it feels like the world is moving too fast, it can feel powerful to go against the grain and find a group of people who believe the same things as you. With news everywhere, and an article or story to back up any angle of any narrative, everyone can confirm their bias and feel correct. Emphasis on the feel part. We are seeing the saying, agree to disagree, so much more recently. I don't know whether you guys have noticed that, but because we live in a world where opinions are treated like facts and, share the stage on platforms like Twitter next to facts, there is really no right or wrong, merely difference in opinion. But this is not the way the world works. Facts are facts, but unfortunately, this is not reflected by social media or their algorithms, because once you like a particular idea, you just get fed more of this idea, which confirms, what might just be an opinion into something that feels like a fact because you've got confirmation. While COVID gave these social media giants a kick of momentum to fact check more often, and now we have like the false news advertisements when things, might be faulty, and, Trump lost his Twitter handle. There is still so much false information that makes waves on these platforms because everyone has an opinion and everyone can share it. Social media creates our own little bubbles where everything is about us. Sometimes all people need to feel like they have a valid argument is to see others supporting it as well. And as we all know, this is no problem for social media. With billions of daily users, there will almost always be someone who has shared a similar perspective on an issue, and almost always an opinion piece or article talking about the same thing. Everyone can feel, again, emphasis on the feel part, like an expert. And when people feel like experts on an issue themselves, what weight did true experts and professionals hold? When everyone is an expert, no one is an expert. And this is dangerous. So in order to sort fact from fiction, young people have to be increasingly skeptical. And as a passionate student of philosophy, as well as journalism, a part of me thinks that we should apply a level of skepticism to everything, even sometimes the things that we hold to be most true. But there is undeniably a point at which too much skepticism can be detrimental, because when nothing's true, who do you trust, and what authority do authorities have? In a world that is unpredictable, take 2020, it is becoming increasingly important that we find trust in the media. Because if we don't know who to trust, and experts aren't experts, then all information looks exactly the same. Rather than sources being the indicator of legitimacy, when you see an issue and then you're able to sort of track who wrote it and the source, that's sometimes how we've previously been able to see legitimacy and indicate legitimacy. But now we are able to sort of shape legitimacy through our bias, because we search up an idea or we see an idea and then we suddenly have just this rush of information that backs up something that isn't true. And this can actually feel like legitimacy for a lot of people, and this is a very slippery slope. Now, there are undeniably issues concerning social media and news apathy for young people. But the way forward is not to eliminate social media, because I just don't see that happening. As I mentioned at the start, I feel like social media will consistently be our main source of news. We have grown up with social media. For my 16-year-old sister and her friends, it is the first thing they check when they wake up in the morning. It's part of their travel to school, their extracurriculars, and for the majority of young people, it's the last thing checked before bed. It's the start of the day and the end of the day and everything in between. We've grown up with social media, so we aren't just going to let go of it. So what we have to do is use our tools and resources to make the digital world that has been created for us work for us as well. Now, I will address the elephant in the room. So, of course, there is only so much we can do when these social media giants are the ones with the authority to make systemic changes to the way people use their applications. They can make the changes to the apps that, change everyone's experience with their platform. But what we can do is provide young people with the tools to navigate the digital world, irrespective of the way these apps operate. We can teach young people and provide people like myself and my sister and her friends and, your children or your students with the tools to navigate what is a really complex world online. And I am aware that I've been very pessimistic so far in my talk about the issues with social media, but I want to set the stage with some more positive statistics. So 1 in 4 of Gen Z familiar or are somewhat familiar with the term media literacy. Gen Z overall have higher media abilities when compared to other generations. 75% of Gen Z think it's important to prevent the flow of misinformation, higher than any other generation. Gen Z Australians are almost twice as likely to have a high level of critical reflection about entertainment media when compared to those aged 75 or older. And civic engagement is higher among heavy social media users, where young people, as we know, like their social media. So these statistics illustrate two things most significantly. Young people aren't ignorant when it comes to media literacy, and just because some young people are apathetic when it comes to news intake, this does not mean that we are apathetic and quiet when it comes to civic engagement. If anything, we are among the loudest generation. See, for example, the climate strikes. We care about the world. It is just often quite difficult to know which facts about the world we can trust. So here are some ideas that I want to put forward to help with this. So the first is about youth agency. Now, my background is all very closely linked to student voice. I was part of Victoria's peak body for student representation, Vic SRC, and I chaired the organisation, the student team, when I was 15. And I am now a student voice advocate for an organisation that improves classroom practice through harnessing the power of student voice. Pivot Professional Learning. And I sit on the boards of Wellbeing in Schools Australia and the Alana Madeline Foundation's Media Literacy Board of Advisors. When you involve young people in the decision-making processes that affect them, we become more engaged in the outcome. I saw this with my personal experience at school, and am now working to help schools build cultures of student voice so their students can feel this as well. When my legal studies teacher wanted to improve the classroom and actually sort of worked with me and the other students in the class to co-create the next steps forward, we all ended up working more cooperatively to help the class run smoothly because we felt partly accountable for its success. And in the process, we also felt closer to our teacher because we felt like she actually valued our voices, creating a dynamic of strong mutual respect. Now, I believe if we give young people an active voice in the media, young people could also feel this way towards journalists. If we teach young people about those behind the news, the journalists, and involve them in the process of news writing and delivery, not only will young people, understand how news is created, but they won't feel so alienated from journalists themselves. So maybe when I tell people that I want to be a journalist, they won't have that sort of pessimistic attitude that I mentioned at the start of this presentation. A couple months ago, I was so fortunate to attend 2021's Australian Media Literacy Research Symposium and hear Saffron Howden speak about her book, Kid Reporter: The Secret to Breaking News. In this book, young people are taught the type of questions journalists ask and are given the tools to create news stories of their own. The idea of informing young people about media literacy through journalism, I think, is extremely powerful, and I think this is an area schools and communities can build on. What if every school had a student newspaper and every community paper had young people creating stories? Through involving young people in the creation of news, not only would we sort of understand firsthand the things that journalists look out for, and in ourselves, we would sort of be able to look out for in articles the things that might indicate bias because we've written stories ourselves and know those sort of strategies on our own. And additionally, young people would feel less disconnected from the news because they would understand the heads behind the headlines. The second way to move forward with this issue is a useful framework for teaching media literacy skills. Interestingly, Gen Z are much more likely to nominate the education system as their main source of support for engaging with media when compared to baby boomers, so 23% versus 4%. Schools play such a key role in the lives of young people. We spend 6 hours, 5 days a week at school. So if we were to implement a consistent framework for media literacy education, schools would be a really great place to start. Now, the Alana Madeline Foundation's Media Literacy Lab is a brilliant approach to media literacy education. It engages secondary students in essential media literacy education through an innovative, gamified resource that reflects youth experiences. When young people are learning about media literacy, we don't want to learn about it from a theoretical lens. We want to be taught in a way that feels real to us and is relatable to the experiences that we have with news on a daily basis. So, the integration of a gamified experience that is really unique to the Media Literacy Lab is a really wonderful way to sort of help young people learn about media literacy in a way that is not only engaging but applicable to real life experiences. Because what the lab does is it teaches young people through placing the user in situations where they actually have to make choices and choose between options that they would face in the real world. And at the end of the module, you're sort of asked to reflect on the result of each decision, or at least you get the opportunity to, making this framework for teaching media literacy extremely impactful because it's applicable to real world scenarios and it just makes sense to young people. If we are to move forward with social media as a main source of news, young people have to be taught how to navigate these platforms from a young age. In not only an engaging way but a relatable way. Just learning about the term media literacy and what it means is so important to starting the critical thinking and critical reflection skills that are required to navigate the digital world from the vantage point of the 21st century. Just sort of learning that we need to sort of just be slightly critical of the news that we are consuming because there's the potential that it could be, false information, or it could just be slightly biased. Being open and being aware of that from a really young age is a wonderful place to start. And I think that these types of conversations with young people, the sooner they happen, the better. Hopefully, if we engage young people in journalism and make media literacy education relatable and applicable to the lives of young people, my generation and those to come will feel like they can find trust in the media and those journalists who are the heads behind the headlines, and they won't feel so disengaged. Hopefully, there will be more young journalists in the near future, especially if we get, like young journalism teams on at schools, or young people working in community newsrooms. And I look forward to the day when other people like me share their ambition for journalism and aren't met with the pessimistic response, oh yes, we need some good journalists these days, which I guess isn't entirely pessimistic because it's sort of indicating that, there are people who can change it, but hopefully people's minds won't automatically go to the bad examples of journalism and will instead start to view journalism for the legitimate actors in democracy that we are. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to engaging with the Q&A session. Thank you.